start early. If you're going to plant fruit crops, start early, at least 6 to 12 months before planting, because you want to find the site, you want to get the site ready to plant, and do your soil testing and soil modification. When I soil test for fruit, I like to soil test upper 8 inches and 8 to 16 inch steps. I'm interested in what's going on in the subsoil, because I can change that before we plant, but after you've got the tree or the vine in the ground, you cannot raise subsoil pH without damaging the plant. It's all up front. So I like to see that done. What do you want to plant? You know, what size? I don't like to buy big trees to plant. I was in a place the other day where a person had bought some trees down at I don't know, Lowe's or someplace, and they had apple trees that were like 10, 12 feet tall, and they had no limbs down here. Well, if you want to have limbs down here, the only way you're going to get it is to cut the tree off about that high. Why pay a lot of money for a big plant that really is not that good and then cut most of it off and throw it away? I like to buy small plants. So if I'm buying an apple tree, I'm buying what we call a 4 to 6 foot unbranched whip. It's just a stick. And then I'm cutting the top out of it about somewhere around 2.5 feet or just above that off, because I want the bottom limbs down about 2 feet off the ground. In peaches, our most common, the most popular variety among peach growers is a 30, 36 inch tree. So it's like that. And we're still cutting it back a ways, but we want the limbing down here. These big trees that you see in a lot of the garden centers, from a commercial fruit production standpoint, are cold trees. They may be healthy, but we don't want them because they're not going to work in our orchard. So, you know, go with what the growers that make a living on it have, because they got the experience. Blueberries, a 2 or 3 year old plant. I don't like 1 year plants to go to the field with. They're a little too small. A good 1 year old grapevine does great. And if you're getting blackberries, you can go with a small plant or you can go with a root section, and they'll do every bit as well. So don't feel like you've got to have a big crop. Do what you can, though, to create a favorable environment. So when you dig the hole to plant the tree or the vine, dig the hole deep enough that you can set the plant at about the same depth that it was in the nursery. And if you look at the trunk, you can see that. Dig the hole wide enough that you can spread the roots out without having to curl them around to fit in the hole. Don't root prune any more than you absolutely have to. When you plant it, most of our fruit trees, essentially all of our fruit trees, are grafted or budded trees. And the Graft Union or Bud Union, which is right here, where you see this tree, the trunk grows up and then it curves over and then up. There's where the bud was set. This always stays above ground, about 2 to 4 inches above ground. So that'll give you an idea how deep that hole needs to be dug. If you bury the bud, I expect to see 1 or 2 things happen. One, the tree's probably going to die. The second thing is that if it doesn't die, in some cases, it's going to root above where the budding was, and you'll lose the effect of the rootstock. And so if you've purchased a tree because it's a size controlling rootstock, you no longer have a dwarf tree. Or if it's got resistance to certain diseases, you no longer have that if it roots above the Graft Union.
What's the chicken water for?
Rabbits. Yeah. And this time of year especially, or in midwinter, if we get a little bit of snow, where normal food supplies are harder to find, if you've just planted a fruit tree, they like that a lot. And had a guy tell me one time that rabbits didn't like peach trees. And I happened to be in his county. We had a little snow one night, and I went out to his orchard the next morning, and he lost several hundred peach trees to rabbits that night. So rabbits can be a problem. There are some other things like voles that can be a problem, and deer. But anyhow, and that's another story altogether, wildlife control. Okay, what I've done is I've gone through and listed several different types of fruit and some of the more common varieties that we're planting depending on the type of production system you're using. So I'm not going to spend time on those because we're already running out of time. But in grapes, we can grow a lot of different types of grapes. One thing that's happened over the last few years is that there are a lot of good seedless grape varieties out there. And so if you want to have a good eating grape and you don't really care for seeds, we've got a lot of options. Let's see, yeah. This shows, these are all seedless grapes that will do very well in our part of the world. Up until just a few years ago, you didn't see that. And people wanted to plant seedless. They would plant Thompson seedless or Flame. They don't do well here at all, but these will. And most of these came out of the University of Arkansas breeding program. Marquis came out of Cornell, Vanessa came out of Minnesota. Other than that, everything that's listed here is from Arkansas, and they'll do pretty good here. Blackberries, you can grow blackberries that the normal blackberry has the cane has a 2-year life cycle. They're biennials. The roots live for many years, but the above ground part has a 2-year life cycle. The first year we call it a prima cane. The second year we call it a flora cane. And some varieties, most of them that we've had in the past, are flora cane bearers. That is, they bloom on a 2-year-old cane, and then the cane dies after that. Some varieties will bloom on the current year's cane in the top of the cane, and those are the ones that will give you fruit up until frost in the fall of the year. And these two are out of the Arkansas breeding program. Primark Freedom is thornless. Primark 45 is thorned, but it might be the best berry. And then Primark Traveler is also thornless. It's as good as Primark Freedom, but a little firmer. It's a shipping berry. But these are available, and they can give you fruit from, in many years, from about the latter part of July, early August, all the way up to frost. The floricane bearing ones that grow that fruit in the summer, if I were going to pick 3 of them right now, and we look at multiple varieties so we can stretch out our harvest a little bit. Ouachita, and that the Arkansas Blackberry program, they used Indian tribe names for all their new varieties. And so these, Ouachita is an Indian tribe. This is probably the most widely planted blackberry in the world right now. And it's good. You know, the old thornless varieties didn't taste as good as the thorny berries. And these are a lot better than they used to be. So Ouachita is good. Natchez is good. It's a bigger berry. Ripens a little bit earlier. Osage is a new release, not as big a berry, but it ripens a little bit later, and you can stretch out your harvest a little bit more. Triple Crown is a USDA release. It's even later. And Kiowa is a thorn berry. And the thing that's good about it is it's big. And it's the biggest blackberry out there, but it's also very good tasting. I taught a blackberry production class, and we had several commercial blackberry growers from North Carolina in the class. And I asked them what, if they were planting a blackberry for themselves, for fruit for themselves, what would you plant? And they all picked Kiowa, which surprised me because it is thorned. But they say if you handle it right, thorns are not a problem, but the fruit's good enough to make thorn ears not an issue. So we've got some really good varieties out there right now.
So what's the difference in the floricane and the primocane?
Okay, the floricane is the second year of that cane's life.
Okay.
And the primocane is the first year. And a primocane variety will fruit in the top, generally the upper third of that cane, and that will die after harvest. And if you leave the cane in, it'll fruit down below the next summer and then die. But that second crop is not going to be that big a crop. These won't fruit at all that first year. They do all their fruiting the second year, and then after harvest, they die. Okay, we can grow several different types of blueberries. And the high bush blueberries, we've got northern high bush, and now we've got southern high bush varieties. In Smith County, I would look at northern high bush a little bit more than would southern high bush because they're a little bit more adapted to the weather conditions. But several different varieties. Now, if you read the literature, they're going to tell you that these are self-fertile. They don't need cross-pollination. If you've got 2 or more varieties, you will have more blueberries, bigger blueberries, and better blueberries than if you've only got 1 variety. So don't believe everything you read, okay? One of the things to watch if you want to plant southern high bush, and there are a few varieties, and these 3 are the ones that I'd suggest here. Watch the chilling hours on the other varieties, because some of them are real low chillers and are good for planting, say, in South Alabama, South Georgia, whatever, but certainly not up here. A lot of the blueberries that we've grown in Tennessee and further south are rabbit eye types. They're native to the Gulf Coast, but they'll do pretty well up here. So there are a lot of different varieties that'll do pretty good. You need to have 2 or more varieties to assure cross-pollination. Unfortunately, a rabbit eye won't cross-pollinate with a high bush. They don't bloom together as a rule. So you need to have 2 or more rabbit eye varieties and 2 or more high bush varieties to get successful cropping each year. When you plant a blueberries, if you plant, say, a 2-year-old or 3-year-old plant, it's going to have fruit buds on it when you plant it. Don't let it fruit. So generally when I plant them, I'm going to take my pruning shears and cut off the fruit buds. And fortunately, it's easy to do because the fruit buds will be on the terminal 2 to 4 inches of the shoots. They're bigger buds, plumper buds. The leaf buds down below them are very small, pointed, and relatively indistinct. So when you go in, you can tip the shoots and get off the fruit buds. The first couple years, focus on growing the plant, so that when it does start to fruit, you can get a pretty good crop. If you let especially a high bush fruit the first year, you could run it out to the point it never is going to grow much. In 5-6 years down the road, it's about the size it was when you planted it. You can't get much fruit that way. Okay, peaches, you can get, most of the peaches that we grow are yellow flesh and freestone. That's what most people want. There are some wonderful white flesh freestone peaches out there now too. And but I mentioned that we've gotten new varieties. If I were planting 1 variety of peaches right now, Contender would be my first choice. It's a longer chiller, it's a 1,000-hour peach, it's a really good quality peach, and I have seen a few years, actually before these other varieties came on the market, where Contender was the only variety to fruit in the orchard. So they're more consistent. Nectar is a white flesh, and a lot of times we talk about white flesh peaches being low acid peaches, and they are. And some people think they taste sweeter than the yellow flesh. They probably taste sweeter but don't have any higher sugar content. It's just they don't have the acid. They're a little bit more difficult to handle. They bruise easier. But there are some good varieties, and so you can stretch out your harvest by having several varieties. And apples, there are a whole lot of apple varieties out there, but some of them that have been released, and this is only a partial list, have got pretty good disease resistance characteristics, and I'd select those because not only are they resistant to some of our more common diseases, but they're pretty good fruit. Now, if we look at Liberty, Liberty is the most disease-resistant apple we've ever had. And it's a good fruit. It's good for fresh eating. It's got a little bit of tartness to it, but it's a good crisp apple that cooks well. It's essentially, it and these others are immune to apple scab, highly resistant to cedar rust. Now, that's not a big deal here because you don't have any cedar trees, right? But the eastern red cedar and apples are not a compatible mixture as a rule, because many of our apple varieties are highly susceptible to that disease. So having resistance will help you. Now, resistance doesn't mean immunity, okay? So they still need to be cared for, but they're a lot easier. And we also see resistance to mildews and fire blight. Look at disease resistance as you make your selections, and you'll be more consistent in getting a crop.